Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR Lady. Thanks for tuning in to the HR Lady podcast. Well, I have some exciting news, exciting for me anyways. While I will continue the HR Empowerment series, only the first episode will be posted on my podcast, the HR Lady channel. So for the foreseeable future, the remaining 4 episodes, because it's usually 5 episodes, will be hosted by Aurora Training Advantage. So please find the HR Empowerment Podcast at auroratrainingadvantage.com/podcasts. If you become a member of Aurora Training Advantage, you can listen to the podcast and get HRCI and SHRM credits for listening on their channel. Now, the HR Lady podcast will continue to have short yet information-packed podcast episodes that help you deal with the workplace challenges in this ever-changing world with these things called human beings. There just might be adult language involved moving forward, but we will warn you first. With that said, what I want to do real quick is quickly cover 6 tips to addressing performance or behavior issues at work, which you can find on my website and in my book, Suck It Up, Buttercup, Be a Leader, People Will Follow. So the 6 tips to addressing either performance or behavior issues are as follows. Number 1, when you are having an issue with a person, whether it's performance, which is a little easier to identify, or behavior, which isn't always easy to identify. But number 1, determine what the behavior or the action is, or in many cases, the lack of action or lack of appropriate behavior. So write that down, determine what it is. Hopefully you have some kind of company values or maybe a code of ethics that you could say, okay, this is behavior related and this is directly against what we have all agreed upon when you became hired or when you signed the employee handbook of how we will act in the workplace. So number 1, identify the behavior or the action or the lack of. Number 2, identify the impact on the team or on the bottom line, whatever the impact is, and write that down as well. Number 3, identify the change that is expected. So what do you expect the employee to change? Be very detailed, be very specific. Make no assumptions that they know what you're talking about. Number 4, identify a deadline for change. And yes, it can be immediately. I do have to warn you, for the immediate change, it's usually based on behavior. There may need to be some kind of training that's involved. And then obviously for performance, there may also might need to be some kind of training or coaching that's involved. So be fair. But in many cases, especially with behavior, it can be immediate. Number 5, identify a consequence if change does not happen. And then number 6, hopefully everything has worked out beautifully. You can celebrate the change with the employee you were coaching. In some cases, however, you may have to implement the consequence, which is termination. Do not celebrate that. That is something that is not to be celebrated. That's a failure on everybody's part. But I'd rather you implement the consequence sooner than later so you're not affecting the rest of the team. I mentioned the first couple areas here to say, write this down, write this down, write this down. Here's why. All verbal conversations should be communicated in writing. This written communication can be an email. It doesn't have to be a fancy form. If you have a fancy form or a system, a technology system, by all means use it. Don't use paper. But it could just be an email recapping your verbal conversation with the employee and saying, here are the 6 items that we just went over, starting with the behavior or the action that they're not up to par on, all the way down to the consequences. Many people don't take verbal warnings seriously. They just didn't think that it was that serious. So that's why written documentation is super important. It signals to their brain that the conversation was serious. Also, you want to cover your assets when and if the time comes that you have to terminate this employee. They knew from those 6 steps, 1 to 6, that if you don't change this behavior, or you don't change this performance or this action, termination may be likely. And they've put that, it's been in writing. We're all on the same page about it. Most HR or legal experts will also tell you to get the employee to sign it. So if it was a performance improvement plan or just a review form, to get them to sign it. That would be fantastic. They don't necessarily have to sign it. Maybe you have a witness sign it. At a minimum, what I'm telling you is to have the conversation with the person and then document it with that person, not just some isolated binder of secret complaints. I will have these tips outlined on my website. There's actually a free download down the download area, thehrlady.com, and in the explanation of this podcast on my podcast channel on Podbean. Take care. Thanks for coming.